How you doing? Today is June 10th, 2020, and this is day 6 of 37 conversations. For those who've been following this series so far, I appreciate it. Getting a lot of shares, a lot of people having conversations with me, having conversations in the comments. Really appreciate that. That's what this is all about, just sparking a conversation. Part of what inspired me to do the 37 conversations was a lot of the conversations that I've had with friends and colleagues and family, and even just, random people on the street regarding the moment that we're in right now. And I've been protesting, speaking to activists, speaking to organizers of Black Lives Matter, speaking with anti-protesters even, speaking to just random people on the street who are asking about why the movement is what it is and, why this moment feels different and so on. And there's, a resonating theme, or themes, I should say, that come up in these conversations are hypocrisy, contradictions, and irony as well. And, this conversation today isn't to call anybody out, isn't to place blame on anybody. That's not what this has ever been about. This has always been about sparking a conversation, you having a conversation with people that you care about. I have always been doing these live on Instagram, but some of my friends had asked me to go live on Facebook, so I'm also live on Facebook today. And for those who haven't been following the series, this will be posted on Instagram, on my IGTV, and that's where it will live. And I'll probably post this conversation on Facebook as well. So, just getting into it, hypocrisy and contradictions and irony. There's a lot that is related to this moment right now as it relates to discussing race. What this is all about is the challenges in discussing race and the fact that I believe that we aren't speaking enough. We aren't having enough conversations about it. There's a lot of stereotypes and misunderstandings, and I think that's the root and foundation of a lot of that is the fact that a lot of people just aren't speaking and conversing with one another. So, I wanted to share with you some of the, hypocrisies and contradictions and irony that has been expressed to me, some of which I also feel myself regarding this moment. And, again, this is for you to listen to and to have a conversation and a dialogue and to just think about it. So getting into it right now. So I want you to imagine these things. Imagine these, hypocrisies, imagine these contradictions, and also imagine the irony in some of the statements that I'm going to make with you right now. So first of all, imagine that thinking the Black Lives Matter movement is an anti-police movement. Imagine being a Black person who has traveled and lived around the world, but has only been, imagine being a Black person who has traveled and lived around the world, but has only experienced being called the N-word in the United States where they were born. Imagine being a diehard fan of a sports team that's comprised mostly of people of color, but not wanting one of them to date your daughter. Imagine being a person who believed that LeBron James should shut up and dribble when he spoke out on issues regarding police brutality, but believing that Drew Brees is allowed to have an opinion when he initially said that he didn't believe players should kneel for the national anthem. Imagine believing that all lives matter, but being silent when Hispanic people are being detained at our southern border and families are being separated. Imagine teaching your children or students about how great our founding fathers were for writing the Declaration of Independence, but not telling them that almost all of them owned slaves. Imagine speaking negatively about the structure of Black and brown families in this country and not thinking policies such as mandatory minimum prison sentences and the 3 strikes law in no way contributed to that. Imagine being Black and thinking your culture is being appropriated when you see people of other races putting their hair in cornrows or dreadlocks, but you don't have a problem when a Black woman dyes her hair blonde. Conversely speaking, imagine believing that cornrows or dreadlocks are unkempt or ugly on Black people, but thinking it's stylish and cool when a Kardashian sister or Ariana Grande wears their hair in that way. Imagine being a business owner who has accumulated their wealth accepting money from Black people, yet doesn't support the Black Lives Matter movement. Imagine telling someone the appropriate way to protest a matter when that matter has nothing to do with them or their life experiences. Imagine not being of Native American heritage and believing you have the right to tell someone that a team name, such as the Washington Redskins, isn't offensive. Imagine believing you are teaching your children to be accepting of people of all races, yet you intentionally enroll them in private schools that are predominantly white. Imagine believing Imagine being an HR manager at a company who states that they're an equal opportunity employer, but you look at a resume differently when the name on the letterhead reads Omar Jenkins instead of Brian Smith. Imagine being the darkest person in the room in a professional setting and constantly being the only person broaching the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Imagine the NFL not supporting players in a league which is comprised mostly of black men in 2016 when its athletes attempted to bring attention to police brutality, yet every team in 2020 participated in Blackout Tuesday. Imagine being the CEO of a company or a nonprofit organization that serves primarily a black and brown population, but not having an adequate representation of people from these races in your leadership or board of directors. On the same token, imagine being a CEO of a company whose executive leadership does not reflect the diversity of its staff. Imagine knowing that the use of tear gas has been prohibited for the use in war for almost 100 years, but thinking it's okay to be used by police departments across the United States. Imagine believing the war on drugs was successful and not a guise for mass incarceration of people of color. Imagine calling rioters who destroy property thugs, but not acknowledging the fact that black and brown people's homes, churches, and businesses have been burned down and bombed for hundreds of years in the United States. Imagine having no problem condemning Antifa, but not acknowledging white supremacy. Imagine wanting to be black until it's time to be black. Imagine looting, destroying, or vandalizing property in the name of social justice, but posting a picture or quote of Martin Luther King Jr. every year on his birthday. Imagine supporting efforts to defund the police, but not having a plan to ensure the safety of our communities isn't compromised in the event that happens. Imagine telling someone that there were great people on both sides of the Unite the Right rally that occurred in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017. Imagine being the CEO of a company, business, or nonprofit organization and crafting statements about social justice or diversity, equity, and inclusion, but not utilizing the voices of your employees of color or members of marginalized populations in crafting that message. Imagine believing that a convicted felon who has successfully completed their jail sentence has not paid their debt to society and shouldn't be allowed to vote and or additionally have to identify themselves as a convicted felon on job applications. Imagine telling people protesting for Black Lives Matter that their protests aren't necessary when you've never protested for anything in your life. Imagine believing in the fact that all lives matter, yet continuing to patronize Chick-fil-A, though they have a history of funding anti-LGBTQ organizations. Imagine being an active Black Lives Matter supporter, but not supporting the Me Too movement, matters impacting the LGBTQ community, matters impacting citizens with special needs, or the separation and detention of families at the southern border, as if people of color aren't impacted by these issues as well. Imagine not being black and your favorite music genres are hip hop and R&B, yet you are silent on social issues impacting black people. Imagine believing that the only people who are racist are white. Imagine being poor and thinking that no one wants to help lift you out of your circumstance. Imagine hearing a narrative branding an entire population as murderers, rapists, and thugs and not thinking that's harmful. Imagine the fact that throughout history, white supremacists have said the greatest fear to their America isn't the black criminal, but instead an educated black person. Imagine believing all lives matter, but you are silent when a candidate you voted for votes no on anti-lynching legislation. Imagine being black and canceling Harvey Weinstein and Matt Lauer for their alleged Me Too transgressions, but not finding it in your heart to cancel Bill Cosby and R. Kelly. Imagine being outspoken on social issues, but not being registered to vote, though you are of voting age. Imagine thinking that all police are racist. Imagine how difficult it is for people of color to believe it when you say, I'm not racist, but my spouse is. Imagine being black or Hispanic and looking at other blacks or Hispanics different than you because their skin is lighter than yours. Imagine being a black man walking the street in a three-piece suit and seeing how people look at you in comparison to how people look at you when you're wearing basketball shorts, a tank top, and a backwards hat, and finding it strange because to you, you're the same person, just in different clothes. Imagine believing that the social programs such as SNAP and welfare aren't necessary, but you never once had to wonder where your next meal was coming from. Imagine believing the quote, liberal media delivers fake news, but not acknowledging the way that the, quote, conservative media portrays people of color. Imagine not being black and believing you know what it means to be black in America. Imagine being rich and thinking that just because you know the cost of everything, that you know the value of everything as well. Imagine using the terms Chinese virus or Kung flu in relation to the coronavirus and not understanding how, to an entire population of people, those terms are not only hurtful, but patently racist. Imagine not being a person of color and drafting legislation that directly impacts people of color, but not utilizing voices of people of color to inform that legislation and or policy. Imagine not being a person of color and telling a person of color how someone is not racist towards them. Imagine thinking that building walls is more productive and cheaper than building bridges. Imagine being a white person and believing and or telling a black person they should go back to Africa when it was white people who brought us here as slaves. Imagine believing that George Zimmerman had the right to stand his ground, but Trayvon Martin didn't. Imagine being a person who fights for and believes in an inclusive society, but you don't stand in solidarity with other marginalized populations. Imagine being someone who has never experienced systemic racism, yet believing that white privilege does not exist. Imagine living during a global pandemic such as coronavirus and being scared to wear a face covering in public because you're a person of color. Imagine attempting to explain to a marginalized population that you are not a part of, that they are not being marginalized. Imagine hearing the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and not listening to someone when they tell you that they don't believe that those words were written for them. Imagine thinking that all black people are lazy and want handouts from the government. Imagine thinking that all white people are racist. Imagine considering yourself to be woke, but you don't know the difference between the ideals of Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois or how they relate to this moment right now that we're in today. Imagine being a Christian and knowing that John 4:20 states, whoever claims to love God but hates a brother or sister is a liar, yet being racist. So these are some of the hypocrisies, contradictions, and ironic statements that, have been shared with me, in these times before starting this series. Again, if you're just joining or you're seeing the live now, go back to the beginning of the conversation, get the context, please. Or you can get the context when I post it to Instagram. I also post it to Facebook tonight. But this is day 6 of my 37 conversations. I come up from a family that loves films, that loves movies. That's how we bond. That's how we got together. That's how we enjoyed each other's company. We laughed, cried, all that kind of stuff. Tomorrow, day 7, will be on 37 films that I think that you should see. And I'm going to bring in probably the second best movie expert that I know next to myself, my little brother, Brandon Johnson. So hopefully y'all can think about the conversation that we had today that I shared with you. Not to be offended by it, not to feel, not that someone was coming for you, but rather to think about it and to have those similar conversations with people that you care about. Have a good night.